By the time Alexander Anderson reached 55, he had already built a brilliant reputation in the world of luxury real estate. His negotiation skills and ability to anticipate market changes helped him secure the trust of high-profile clients, making him a reliable name among the urban elite. Several skyscrapers in the city skyline bore his signature, each serving as a reminder of his relentless pursuit of success. Many envied his life, seeing only his outward achievements. Alexander lived in an exclusive suburban enclave, where his home was the embodiment of refined taste. Carefully manicured lawns and an elegant interior, blending classic beauty with modern comforts, made this house more than just a residence. It was his sanctuary. He shared this ideal home with his wife, Sophia, who was equally successful. As a marketing executive for a large company, Sophia had earned a solid reputation through her innovative campaigns and her effortless charm with clients. Together, they were often called a power couple, seen at charity galas and prestigious events, epitomizing grace and success. Their public image suggested a life full of glamour and happiness. Laughter echoed through their home, and their future seemed as bright as their present. To outsiders, Alexander and Sophia had it all. But beneath the flawless surface, Alexander began to notice subtle but unsettling changes in his wife's behavior. Over the past 5 months, Alexander had observed small but troubling signs that something was amiss. At first, he ignored them. Sophia had always been busy at work, but now she seemed to spend even more time there. Her business trips had become longer, and more evenings were consumed by work. Sometimes, Alexander would catch her intensely focused on her phone, her expression serious as she typed something. When he gently asked her about it, she would brush it off with a practiced smile, saying, "Just important projects at work." But her eyes met his less often, and something about her demeanor seemed off. It wasn't just her schedule that had changed. Sophia, once full of life and energy, now seemed distant. The joy that once filled her laughter had faded, replaced by a hollow echo. Conversations that used to flow easily were now strained, as if an invisible wall had grown between them. Alexander's anxiety grew, but he tried not to dwell on it, convincing himself that her recent promotion and workload were the cause. Despite his efforts to rationalize Sophia's behavior, a nagging suspicion began to take root in Alexander's mind. No matter how much he tried to focus on her work commitments as the reason for the changes, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Meanwhile, his professional life remained stable, even thriving. His days were filled with meetings, property showings, and high-stakes negotiations. Alexander thrived on the excitement of deals and helping clients find their perfect luxury homes, always keeping a close eye on the constantly shifting real estate market. His clients trusted him completely, knowing that he would stop at nothing to fulfill his commitments. But despite all his professional success, Alexander's heart was truly tied to his relationship with Sophia. No matter how busy his work life was, she always came first. He would leave work early to prepare her favorite dishes, light candles, and select her favorite wine for cozy dinners. On weekends, he carefully planned romantic getaways, hoping to rekindle their old closeness. In those quiet moments, away from the hustle of business, Alexander found his greatest happiness. Whether it was watching a movie, taking leisurely walks around the neighborhood, or simply sitting together in silence, he cherished these personal moments with her. Despite the emotional distance that had crept into their relationship, Alexander clung to his faith in the strength of their love. He was confident that no matter what challenges they faced, their bond would endure. Just as Sophia had supported him through the ups and downs of his career, he was determined to support her. He refused to let doubts destroy his trust in her, choosing instead to focus on the life they had built together and the future still ahead. But as the days turned into weeks, Alexander could no longer ignore the growing sense of unease that weighed heavier on him with each passing day. Alexander began to notice subtle changes in Sophia's behavior, each of which only intensified his growing unease. When he asked her about her day, Her answers were vague, and she often changed the subject, as if hiding something. The warmth that once radiated from her gaze was gone, and now she barely looked him in the eye, especially when he asked questions about her late returns home. New things began to appear around the house, clothing, expensive jewelry, but she never gave a clear explanation of where they came from. His instincts, honed through years of business experience and his ability to read people, were screaming that something was wrong. Yet even with these obvious signs, he hesitated to confront her directly, afraid of shattering the life they had built together. Instead, he convinced himself to trust her, hoping that his suspicions were nothing more than baseless fears. Still, the feeling of dread grew stronger with each passing day, as if the life he had carefully constructed was slowly starting to crumble. What once seemed like small cracks in their relationship had now turned into gaping chasms. The distance between them felt like an abyss, and Alexander often found himself reminiscing about the happy moments they once shared, laughter, the challenges they overcame together. They used to be a team, partners dreaming of a future together. But now, that dream seemed increasingly out of reach. He desperately wanted to rekindle the spark that once defined their relationship, but the tension between them was too strong to ignore the truth. Something had fundamentally changed. One quiet Saturday morning, deciding to distract himself, Alexander finally resolved to fix the leaking pipe in the basement, something he had been putting off for weeks. Sophia had said she was going away for the weekend to a marketing conference, and the house was filled with an unusual silence. Alexander welcomed the quiet. It gave him a chance to focus on something simple and tangible. Grabbing his tools, he headed to the dark basement, filled with boxes of forgotten memories, old decorations, unnecessary furniture, and remnants of their life together. As he descended the stairs, the monotonous sound of dripping water grew louder, reminding him of the task ahead. Kneeling beside the leaking pipe, Alexander found comfort in the simplicity of the work. Fixing things always brought him a sense of order, a clear problem with a clear solution, something he could control. It was a pleasant contrast to the chaos that had overtaken his personal life. For a while, he allowed himself to sink into the familiar rhythm of tightening bolts and sealing joints, focusing solely on his work. But suddenly, faint voices from above broke his concentration. At first, he thought it was the TV accidentally left on, but as the voices became clearer, a heaviness formed in his chest. One of the voices was unmistakably Sophia's, light and playful, so different from the tense conversations they had been having lately. But it wasn't just her tone that troubled him. The second voice, male, low and confident, sent a cold chill through him. He stopped working, straining to listen. "Don't worry, darling," the man said in a calm, assured voice that made Alexander's skin crawl. "When you're at work, I'll take care of everything. The house will go up in flames, along with your naive husband, and you'll collect the insurance payout. After that, we'll sell everything and be free." The wrench slipped from Alexander's hands, clattering loudly onto the concrete floor. His heart pounded wildly, his thoughts racing. He gasped for breath, struggling to make sense of what he had just heard. Desperately, he listened for Sophia's response, praying that somehow he had misunderstood. "No one will ever suspect us," she replied, her voice steady and chillingly calm. "I can't wait for all of this to finally be over." The world around Alexander seemed to turn upside down as the full meaning of her words sank in. The basement, which had once felt like a refuge, now seemed like a prison. Every word he had overheard struck him like a physical blow, confirming the unthinkable. Sophia, the woman he loved and trusted, the woman with whom he had built his life, was planning to kill him. A tidal wave of pain and rage crashed over him, almost pulling him into the abyss of despair. His thoughts raced wildly, connecting all the signs: Sophia's growing coldness, her late-night disappearances, and the empty looks she cast his way. Now everything came together with horrifying clarity. Yet amidst the crushing pain of her betrayal, a steely resolve began to form within him. Alexander was no stranger to hardship. His success in the ruthless world of real estate had been built on unwavering persistence and adaptability, skills that now proved essential in dealing with this personal crisis. Time was not on his side. He needed to act quickly and decisively, setting aside the storm of emotions for later. Survival was his priority, and he realized that Sophia and her lover had severely underestimated him. They saw him as an obstacle to be easily removed from their path to happiness. But Alexander was determined to prove them wrong, to dismantle their plans with the same precision he had used to build his career. Gripping the wrench tighter, he listened intently to the fading footsteps above. The careless way they had planned to eliminate him from their lives ignited an even greater fire within him. He wasn't going to let them destroy him without a fight. Quietly leaving the basement, Alexander moved through the house, hyper-aware of every creak, every shift in the air. He needed a strategy, a flawless plan with no room for error. One wrong move could cost him everything. His mind feverishly sifted through options. He needed undeniable evidence that would not only expose Sophia's infidelity and her lover's betrayal, but also turn the entire situation to his advantage. The stakes were high, but inaction would be far more destructive. To buy time, he pretended to leave the house, telling Sophia he had an important business meeting. It was crucial that she remained confident that everything was as it had always been, that he still suspected nothing of her affair. In reality, he stayed nearby, on alert, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For several days, he maintained this illusion, playing the role of the unsuspecting, devoted husband. Sophia returned from her work conference, her behavior unchanged, secure in her deceit. But Alexander was always one step ahead. Every piece of evidence he gathered reinforced his plan. He wasn't merely going to survive this betrayal. He intended to make both Sophia and her lover pay for what they had done. It was a dangerous game, but he was willing to risk everything for justice. Every conversation with Sophia became an exercise in self-control, each smile masking the fury boiling beneath. Instead of letting the anger consume him, Alexander used it as fuel for his actions. A direct confrontation would be reckless. He needed irrefutable proof, a foolproof plan that would guarantee his safety and ensure revenge. The stakes were incredibly high, but he was prepared to risk it all. Standing once again in the dim basement, his heart pounded as he eavesdropped on a conversation between Sophia and her lover Charles. Every word cut deep, but he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that the slightest sound could give him away. Silently, he took out his phone and began recording, capturing every incriminating detail of their cruel and deceitful conversation. Each word was imprinted onto the phone's memory, becoming a vital weapon in his fight for survival. His hands trembled slightly, but he held them steady enough to ensure the device recorded every sinister inflection. Sophia's voice, once warm and familiar, now radiated a cold malice he couldn't have imagined. Charles, full of smug confidence, spoke as if they had already won, outlining plans that sent a chill down Alexander's spine. When he had recorded enough, he carefully stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Moving with the same caution life had taught him, Alexander silently left the basement, avoiding the creaky floorboards, his thoughts focused entirely on the task ahead. His heart was racing, but his purpose had never been clearer. He had to act swiftly, keeping Sophia and Charles completely in the dark about what he knew until the right moment. They wouldn't break him without a fight. Not now, not ever. After Alexander left the house, he headed straight to the nearest hotel, continuing to pretend he was on a business trip. Approaching the reception desk, he looked professional, his expression calm and composed, even though a storm of emotions raged within him. Once inside the room, he finally allowed himself to grasp the full extent of the situation. The betrayal had cut him deeply, But Alexander knew that impulsive actions driven by rage would only leave him vulnerable. He needed to keep a clear head, carefully considering every move. Sitting on the bed, Alexander took out his phone and replayed the recording. A dark sense of satisfaction flickered inside him when he saw the undeniable proof of the affair that had shattered his life. For a moment, he thought about going to the police but quickly dismissed the idea. The authorities might not act quickly enough to prevent the impending disaster, and trusting his fate to a system that could fail him was too risky. He didn't seek legal justice. He craved revenge, a reckoning that would make Sophia and Charles pay for their betrayal. With renewed determination, Alexander began to formulate a plan. Every detail was meticulously thought out, and he prepared for any unforeseen developments. He intended to turn the situation in his favor, using their own tactics against them. This was no longer just about survival. It was about regaining control of his life. To execute his strategy, Alexander needed an ally. He reached out to James Davis, an old friend, an experienced private investigator. They had worked together years ago, and their friendship was built on mutual trust and shared experiences. Alexander explained the situation to James, laying out the details of the betrayal and presenting the irrefutable evidence he had gathered. James listened intently, his face a mixture of disbelief and resolve. "I'm with you," James said firmly. "We'll make sure they get what they deserve." Together, they began crafting a scenario that would make Sophia and Charles believe their plan was unfolding flawlessly. Alexander had to maintain his facade, pretending to be unaware, while in reality, he was laying the groundwork for their downfall. It was a high-stakes game that demanded patience and precision, but Alexander did not waver. James installed hidden cameras and microphones throughout the house, strategically placed to capture every word and movement. They worked in sync, missing no detail and leaving no room for chance. The trap was set, but Alexander knew it wasn't time to relax just yet. He continued playing his role, interacting with Sophia as if everything was normal, while quietly gathering more evidence, documenting every interaction with care. The psychological strain was immense, testing Alexander's resilience and self-control. But he stayed focused, driven by his thirst for justice. The days dragged on painfully, and every moment spent with Sophia was a painful reminder of her betrayal. Yet he remained composed, watching her closely. Alexander noticed every subtle shift in her behavior, every pause in conversation, trying to catch the slightest hint that she might be suspicious. However, Sophia seemed completely convinced that her deception had gone undetected. She lived her life as usual, unaware that Alexander was always one step ahead. Her phone conversations with Charles were intercepted, and each dialogue was carefully analyzed for inconsistencies. Alexander and James worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of their plan, slowly preparing for its inevitable collapse. In a strange way, Alexander found solace in the precision of their approach. The fact that he was gradually regaining control of his life gave him strength. His instincts, sharpened by years in the real estate business, played a key role in this intellectual battle. In the calm before the storm, Alexander allowed himself a moment of reflection. The betrayal had forced him to reevaluate everything: his life, his values, and what truly mattered to him. He had been pushed to his limits and tested in ways he never imagined. But he had survived. Now, he was stronger, more resilient. Looking ahead, Alexander felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was his chance to rebuild his life, to write a new chapter that would not be defined by the pain of betrayal, but by the justice he sought. It wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to shape a future built on his own terms. When everything was ready, Alexander and James were poised for the final move, ready to bring their meticulously planned operation to its conclusion. They meticulously reviewed every aspect of their plan, ensuring that no detail was overlooked and that every possible obstacle had a solution. The looming confrontation hung over them like a dark cloud, yet amidst the tension, Alexander unexpectedly felt a sense of calm settling within him. His confidence that justice would prevail was unshakable. He was preparing for the coming storm, knowing that the path to resolution would be filled with risk and uncertainty. But he felt ready, strengthened by the awareness that he had done everything necessary to protect himself and reclaim his life. As Alexander prepared to meet with Sophia and Charles, he was filled with determination. He would not stop until the scales of justice tipped in his favor, until the truth came out and the betrayal that threatened to destroy his world was consigned to oblivion. The morning of what should have been an ordinary business trip arrived, but for Alexander Anderson, it was filled with a strange mix of excitement and dread. This was the moment he had so carefully planned, the departure that would set in motion the final act of his long-brewing revenge. After showering and dressing, he entered the bedroom where Sophia sat, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice betraying none of the storm raging inside him. "Morning, dear," she replied distractedly, barely glancing at him. "Any plans for the day?" she asked casually. "Yes," Alexander nodded, keeping his voice calm. "That big real estate deal I told you about. I'll be gone for a few days." She gave him a faint smile that barely touched her eyes. "Good luck," she murmured, her tone distant. Alexander methodically packed his things, making sure Sophia noticed how carefully he placed each item into the suitcase, his laptop, important documents, clothes, maintaining the illusion. He even pretended to check his phone for flight details, furthering the deception. When everything was ready, he zipped the suitcase with exaggerated decisiveness. "Well, I'm off," he announced, standing by the door with his luggage in hand. He leaned in to give Sophia a brief kiss on the cheek, a gesture devoid of emotion. She offered him a small smile, perhaps already contemplating the first move in their twisted plan. "Safe travels," she said, watching him leave with an expression that hinted at hidden intentions. As Alexander drove away from the house, his heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. His senses were heightened, the urgency of his deception hanging in the air. Instead of heading to the airport as he claimed, Alexander drove to a secluded hotel where private investigator James Davis was waiting. From this hideaway, they were preparing for the final phase of their operation. The hotel room had been transformed into their command center. From here, they monitored the live feed from surveillance equipment Alexander had secretly installed throughout the house. Cameras and microphones captured every corner. There wasn't a single spot left unwatched. The tension in the room was palpable as they watched the real-time footage. Alexander's eyes were glued to the screen, watching Sophia move calmly around the kitchen, preparing a light lunch as if it were just another ordinary day. Soon, Charles arrived. Seeing him in his home was a cruel reminder for Alexander of the betrayal that had brought them to this moment. James, the seasoned professional, remained calm and detached, but for Alexander, every second felt like a fresh wound. Charles and Sophia moved confidently, exchanging flirtatious remarks and sneaking kisses, discussing their plans for the evening, unaware that every word, every glance was being recorded. Their audacity was leading them straight into a trap. "I can't believe they're so brazen," Alexander muttered, his voice filled with anger and disbelief. James nodded briefly, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Pride is usually their downfall," he replied calmly. Time crawled by as they continued watching, inching closer to the inevitable confrontation with every passing minute. Sophia and Charles acted as though nothing had changed, unaware that their reckoning was near. They methodically gathered all the necessary materials to stage the arson they had planned, completely oblivious to the fact that every step was being monitored. As night fell, darkness enveloped the house, reflecting the malice in their hearts. Alexander sat tensely in the hotel, the anxiety within him growing with every passing moment. He knew that tonight, everything would change. There was no turning back. "Are you ready?" James asked, casting a fleeting glance at Alexander. Yes, Alexander replied, his resolve only growing stronger. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it. Sophia and Charles moved through the house with grim determination, preparing to put their arson plan into action. Sophia's remarkable composure stood out amidst the chaos. Each of her steps was deliberate as she poured flammable liquids throughout the rooms, unaware that her every move was being recorded with absolute clarity. Charles nervously fidgeted with a lighter, his false bravado only intensifying the fear that gripped Alexander more tightly. Alexander and James had already contacted the authorities, coordinating their arrival to coincide with Sophia and Charles's attempt. The strategy was simple: let them begin, then intervene before the irreparable could happen. As Charles prepared to light the flame, Alexander realized the moment had come. Together with James, they raced toward the house. Their hearts pounded in sync with the roar of the engine as they arrived just in time to see Charles flick the lighter, its flame dangerously close to the gasoline-soaked furniture. Without hesitation, Alexander burst into the house, his sudden appearance shattering the tense silence like a clap of thunder. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. Sophia whipped around, her face draining of color as she realized they'd been caught. Charles froze, the lighter slipping from his hand, his eyes wide with shock. "Did you really think you could escape punishment?" Alexander asked coldly, raising his phone to show them the surveillance footage. Every word, every step of their plan had been recorded. Sophia's confidence evaporated instantly. Her eyes darted between Alexander and Charles, searching for a way out. "Alexander, wait," she stammered, but he cut her off. "Don't even try." His voice was as cold as his gaze. "You were going to kill me, Sophia. You and this scumbag." Charles tried to say something, but the distant wail of sirens drowned him out. The police had arrived, their flashing lights casting ominous red and blue shadows across the room. Officers quickly filled the house, assessing the situation with professional efficiency. "Mr. Anderson?" one of them asked, approaching Alexander. He nodded and handed over the phone, providing all the evidence. "Everything is here," he said quietly. "Attempted arson, conspiracy to murder." Sophia and Charles were swiftly handcuffed, their faces a mixture of shock and horror as they were led outside. Alexander watched as they were taken away, feeling a blend of victory and sorrow. These were people he had once trusted, now revealed as conspirators who sought his destruction. They would face justice, but the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on his shoulders. As the investigative team finished their work, Alexander remained in the living room, feeling the full weight of the ordeal settle on him. The house, once filled with warmth and love, now felt alien, tainted by lies. James approached him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Alex. It's over." Alexander nodded, but his gaze remained distant, lost in a whirl of emotions. He had survived this nightmare, but the wounds from the betrayal would take time to heal. "Thank you, James," he muttered, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I couldn't have done it without you." James smiled, his support unwavering. "Always happy to help, my friend. Now you can move forward." Alexander took a deep breath, feeling a small part of the burden lift from his shoulders. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it was his own. Standing in the house that had been both his refuge and his prison, he silently vowed to rebuild his life, knowing that justice had been served. With one last look at the room, Alexander stepped outside. The fresh night air was like a balm to the emotional storm raging inside him. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it. Armed with the hard-earned lessons of betrayal, he felt confident he would find his way. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense as the judge delivered the final verdict. Sophia Anderson and Charles Brown were found guilty on all charges: attempted murder and conspiracy to commit arson. The case against Sophia and Charles became undeniable. Alexander's meticulous records revealed every detail of their conspiracy. With each playback of their cold, methodical discussions in the courtroom, the depth of their schemes became undeniably clear, leaving those present speechless. When the verdict was read, Alexander, sitting calmly in the back row, felt a wave of relief wash over him. The burden that had once weighed him down finally lifted as Sophia and Charles were led away in handcuffs, their faces frozen in shock and defeat. What once seemed like an insurmountable betrayal had now been fully exposed. The hidden puppet masters behind the scenes of his life had finally faced the consequences of their actions. The sharp sound of the judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, marking the end of a painful chapter, one filled with lies and deceit. The community, which once admired the seemingly perfect lives of Sophia and Charles, now stood firmly on Alexander's side. Neighbors who had previously just nodded to him in passing, unaware of the storm raging in his life, now approached with words of comfort. The betrayal had torn apart the fabric of a once close-knit community, leaving many in shock. But amidst this chaos, Alexander's quiet strength stood out. Friends and acquaintances admired his persistence and resourcefulness. They noted how he had weathered the storm with unwavering determination. Instead of breaking under the weight of betrayal, Alexander turned it into a testament to his resilience. In the weeks following the trial, he became a symbol of courage for those around him, a living embodiment of what it means to face adversity head-on. Invitations to events where people expressed their admiration for him poured in one after another. They shared stories of how his experience had inspired them. Despite the praise, Alexander remained humble, acknowledging that justice had been achieved through a collective effort. Now that the legal battle was behind him, he focused on rebuilding his life. The insurance payout, which had been at the heart of Sophia and Charles's conspiracy, rightfully belonged to him. Additionally, assets tied to their relationship were liquidated, providing Alexander with a comfortable financial cushion. Saying goodbye to the house, a place that had once symbolized love but was now marked by betrayal, was not easy but necessary. The home, whose walls held bittersweet memories, could no longer be his refuge. Moving forward was the only option. Soon he found a buyer, a person ready to fill the house with new memories, and Alexander prepared to leave everything behind. The sale gave him the opportunity to invest in a fresh start. He purchased a modern apartment in the heart of a bustling city, where the energy of new possibilities surrounded him. As he settled into his new home, Alexander felt a sense of renewal. The trials he had endured opened his eyes to others who had suffered similar betrayals, and he realized that his story could empower them. With newfound wealth and personal insight, Alexander dedicated himself to helping those who had also been wronged. He volunteered with legal organizations and support groups, offering guidance and resources to those still struggling with their own challenges. His story deeply moved many, reminding them that resilience and recovery are possible even in the face of immense pain. His journey took him to various cities across the country, where he shared his experiences, teaching others how to turn their pain into strength. With sincere honesty, Alexander spoke of his darkest moments and the steps he took to heal. His words resonated with audiences, inspiring them to reclaim their stories and rebuild their lives. Over time, he became a sought-after speaker, delivering messages of hope and resilience to thousands. Eventually, he wrote a memoir, detailing his journey from betrayal to empowerment. The book became a bestseller, cementing his reputation as a beacon of inspiration for those facing life's greatest challenges. He left the shadows of the past behind, creating a future filled with hope, strength, and the promise of new beginnings. He never quite understood Sophia. Why did she do this to him? What had she lacked in their 34-year marriage? Perhaps he would never understand her, for he had truly loved her and treated her like royalty. But she chose a different path, and now she faces her punishment. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, Then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.